Tom Brady was 41 years old and leading an offense without a true number one receiver, basically grinding out wins with the defense that was clearly showing its age. Across the league, a 23-year-old kid was throwing 50 touchdown passes and making the entire NFL look like they were playing in slow motion. The debate started that season and it got loud fast, but then one night in Tampa in February of 2021, the whole thing was over. And Patrick Mahomes has been chasing that GOAT status ever since. The thing about the 2018 Patriots that usually gets lost in the Mahomes conversation is that the Pats actually went 11-5 that year. Brady threw for 4,355 yards and 29 touchdowns at 41 years old, which is an elite season by any normal standard you want to use. Nothing about 2018 felt normal for this team though, because for the first time in years, the Patriots looked like they were operating at their ceiling instead of their floor. The roster around Brady had some serious problems. Gronk was physically breaking down, and even though he played 16 games, you could see the wear and tear because he wasn't the same dominant force he'd been in previous years. Josh Gordon arrived mid-season from Cleveland with massive talent but zero consistency, and the Patriots were constantly cycling through receivers to try and find someone who could actually separate. Julian Edelman came back from a torn ACL and a suspension to become the security blanket again, but even at his best, he's a slot receiver who doesn't stretch the field vertically. They were winning ugly by grinding out games in the 17-13 range and leaning heavily on Sony Michel in the run game. By using Brady's mastery of the short passing game, they manufactured yards that other teams simply couldn't find with more talent. Belichick's defense that year followed a similar story. It was still scheme heavy and capable of confusing any quarterback, but the personnel was aging and they gave up points in bunches to better offenses. The narrative around New England that whole season was just one question over and over again about how much longer this could possibly last. Brady was the oldest starting quarterback in the league, the dynasty had been running for 18 years at that point, and the salary cap was finally catching up to them. The AFC had belonged to them for almost 2 decades, but now there was a 23-year-old in Kansas City who looked like he was built specifically to take it from them. Brady knew exactly what was happening. You could see it in how he played that year because he was sharper in the pocket and quicker to check down than he had been in his prime. They went 11-5 to win the AFC East and were still standing in January when the games actually mattered. That's just what Brady did and what this program was built for. But in week 6, a 23-year-old walked into Gillette Stadium and nearly ended the whole thing in October. While Brady was busy grinding through a season with an aging roster, Patrick Mahomes was doing something the NFL hadn't seen in a long time. He made the game look easy in a way that forced you to stop whatever you were doing just to watch the screen. The numbers matter here because they tell a story of a whole statistical takeover. He threw for 5,097 yards and 50 touchdowns in 2018, making him only the second quarterback in history to hit both those marks in 1 year. Peyton Manning was the only other person to do it back in 2013, which shows you the kind of air Mahomes was breathing. Pat was completing throws that simply weren't in the standard NFL playbook, like sidearm strikes on the move or deep balls launched off his back foot with a pass rusher in his face. His arm generated so much velocity that he could zip passes from one side of the numbers to the other before the safety could even rotate over. Andy Reid built the entire offense around his ability to improvise, resulting in a system where the play design was just a suggestion, and the real magic happened once Mahomes started figuring things out in real time. The weapons surrounding him made life a nightmare for every defensive coordinator in the league. Tyreek Hill was already the fastest man in football, and Mahomes could drop a ball over a corner's head from 50 yards away without making Hill break his stride. Travis Kelce was winning every single matchup against linebackers and safeties, while Kareem Hunt remained a massive threat out of the backfield. You couldn't take them all away at once, and whenever a defense tried to double team 2 players, Mahomes just carved them up with his legs. Other elite quarterbacks like Drew Brees and Russell Wilson were having great years, but none of them were making the rest of the league look like they were still stuck in the past. The talk about him becoming the next GOAT started almost immediately, and it wasn't just coming from loud fans on social media. Former players and TV analysts were saying the same thing by late November. The narrative was already set that Mahomes wasn't just a great young player, but he was the guy who might actually surpass Brady when his career was finished. That hype is the context you need to understand why Week 6 was such a massive deal. The Chiefs walked into Gillette Stadium with a perfect 5-0 record, after winning most of their games in dominant fashion. What followed was easily the most entertaining regular season game of the year up to that point. On October 14, 2018, this was the ultimate litmus test to see if Mahomes was actually the superstar everyone claimed he was, or if he had just padded his stats against his soft schedule early. Brady and the Patriots wasted no time answering that question during a first half that belonged entirely to New England. The Patriots' offense was sharp and methodical as Brady picked the Chiefs' defense apart with the rhythmic, short passing game that Bill Belichick loved. Sony Michel was punishing defenders on the ground while the Chiefs struggled to finish drives and settled for field goals. Pat looked human for a moment, throwing 2 interceptions because he fell into the traps of a defense that had been tricking young quarterbacks for 2 decades. By the time the teams headed to the locker room, New England held a commanding 24-9 lead. Then the second half started, and everything changed in an instant. Mahomes came back on the field looking like a completely different player who didn't care about the 15-point deficit or his earlier mistakes. He started the third quarter by finding Kareem Hunt for a 67-yard catch and run, which followed up with a 14-yard touchdown strike to Tyreek Hill. After another short score to Hill, Kansas City actually took a 33-30 lead in the fourth quarter. The Gillette crowd that had been screaming all night suddenly got quiet in a way that New England fans rarely experienced at home. But Tom did what he always does and answered right back. He put the Patriots back on top with a 4-yard touchdown run, and a 50-yard field goal from Stephen Gostkowski puts the lead 40-33 with only 3 minutes left on the clock. Most people thought the game was over right then. Instead, Pat uncorked a 75-yard bomb to Hill that tied the game at 40 almost immediately. With the game on the line, Brady took the ball back and showed everyone why he was still the standard. He remained perfectly calm and hit Rob Gronkowski for a 39-yard gain to get the team into field goal range without any hint of panic. Gostkowski stepped up and nailed a 28-yarder as time expired to give the Patriots a 43-40 victory. The game featured 9 lead changes and nearly 1,000 yards of total offense between the two teams. The dynamic is what made the regular season game feel so electric. It also set the stage for their rematch 3 months later at Arrowhead with a trip to the Super Bowl on the line. The first test proved that Mahomes was a real deal, but it also showed that Brady wasn't just ready to hand over the keys to the kingdom just yet. The rematch finally arrived just 3 months after that shootout in Gillette Stadium, this time on the Chiefs' territory. On January 20th, 2019, a record-breaking crowd of 77,034 fans packed into Arrowhead Stadium to create the loudest atmosphere in the history of the franchise. This was a massive milestone because it marked the first time Kansas City ever hosted an AFC Championship game. You could feel the tension building in the city all week. The Chiefs had marched through the regular season with a 12-4 record, Mahomes had locked up the MVP trophy, and they held home field advantage throughout the entire playoff run. The national media spent all week pushing one simple narrative. This was the night the torch would finally be passed to the next generation. But the Patriots had absolutely no interest in following that script. New England took control of the game from the very first possession by using the exact same blueprint they used back in Week 6. They focused on running the ball and draining the clock to keep Mahomes standing on the sideline as a spectator. Sony Michel finished off a massive 15-play opening drive with a 1-yard touchdown run, which sucked the air out of the stadium before the fans could even get loud. By the time Philip Dorsett caught a 29-yard touchdown right before halftime to make it 14-0, the crowd had gone completely silent. The New England defense spent the entire first half making Patrick look human by sacking him and forcing him into uncomfortable 3rd and long situations. Everything changed when the third quarter started and the Kansas City offense finally woke up. Massive 54-yard bomb to Sammy Watkins set up a Travis Kelce touchdown, and Patrick followed that up by hitting Damian Williams for 2 more scores in the fourth quarter. The Chiefs actually fought back to take the lead with only 2 minutes left on the clock, and suddenly Arrowhead was shaking again. After scoring 31 points in the second half across back-to-back possessions, it looked like the comeback was complete. And then we saw the play that people still argue about to this day. Tom Brady dropped back and threw a pass that was intercepted, which should have been the play that ended the game and sent the Chiefs to the Super Bowl. However, D Ford was lined up off sides by a few inches, so the interception was wiped off the board and the drive continued. The Patriots capitalized by scoring a touchdown, but Mahomes answered by driving the length of the field in just 39 seconds to set up a Harrison Butker field goal. That kick tied the game and sent the whole thing into overtime. Brady won the coin toss and took the ball downfield without a single moment of hesitation or panic. He was methodical and precise as he carved up the defense, eventually letting Rex Burkhead seal it with a touchdown run. After the celebration ended, Brady headed off to his 9th Super Bowl appearance. He would go on to beat the Rams 13-3 in Atlanta 2 weeks later in a game that was ugly but incredibly efficient. It was his 6th championship ring, and while he was celebrating, Mahomes was already heading home for the offseason. Tom was operating on a level that Patrick hadn't reached yet. Experience is a powerful thing in the NFL, and that night it was worth more than all the talent in the world. The entire landscape of the NFL shifted completely after Super Bowl 53. At 41 years old, Brady had just secured his 6th ring by beating the boy wonder Sean McVay that everyone thought was next up. It looked like the New England dynasty was going to last forever, but then the unthinkable happened just 14 months later. In March of 2020, Brady walked away from the only team he had ever known to sign a 2-year deal with Tampa Bay. This move ended a 20-year run between New England that produced 6 Super Bowls and created the greatest partnership in the history of the sport. The football world split into 2 camps almost immediately. A lot of people thought Brady was finally washed up and argued that he had been carried by Belichick's system. They expected him to struggle without that specific structure and discipline behind him, while the other half of the league thought he'd be great in Tampa. While everyone was focused on Brady's free agency, something had already happened a month earlier that changed the entire conversation. In Super Bowl 54, the San Francisco 49ers held a 20-10 lead over the Chiefs late in the fourth quarter. It looked like Pat and the Chiefs were going to fall short once again. But then he exploded for 21 unanswered points in the final 6 minutes of the game. Kansas City walked away with a 31-20 victory, and Mahomes was named Super Bowl MVP at just 24 years old. This wasn't just hype anymore because he had officially proven he could win on the biggest game of the planet. Now the debate between the old guard and the new era had some real evidence to back it up. Brady was starting over in a new city at 43 years old with a roster he didn't know, while Mahomes was a defending champion with a fresh $450 million contract extension. The torch wasn't fully passed yet, but it was definitely hanging in the air for whoever wanted to grab it. Pat was still surrounded by elite weapons like Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, while Brady was trying to turn around a Tampa Bay franchise that hadn't seen the playoffs in over a decade. The big question heading into the 2020 season wasn't about whether Mahomes was elite, because we already knew that. People wanted to know if Brady could still win at the highest level without the Patriot way protecting him. On November 29, 2020, the two quarterbacks met once again when the Chiefs traveled down to Tampa Bay. The Kansas City Chiefs rolled into Raymond James Stadium with a 9-1 record and the best resume in the AFC. Tom Brady and the Buccaneers sat at 7-4, still trying to find their identity as a team. This was a classic measuring stick game because it would show if Brady could still hang with the elite or if the Chiefs were simply operating on a different planet than everyone else. And Tyreek Hill answered that question before most fans even finished their Thanksgiving leftovers. The first quarter wasn't even over when Hill had racked up 203 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns, starting with a 75-yard bomb to open the scoring. Mahomes followed that up with a 44-yard strike to make it 17-0. Both throws were absolute perfect examples of why this duo was so dangerous. After that second touchdown, Hill famously flashed a peace sign toward the sideline. But after that rough start, Tampa did come back to lose only by 3. Something had shifted in that second half to lose 27-24. Mahomes finished that afternoon with 462 yards and 3 touchdowns, while Hill set a career high at the time with 269 yards on 13 catches. Brady actually put up 345 yards and 3 scores, which is usually enough to win, but 2 costly interceptions and a defense that couldn't stop the Mahomes to Hill connection proved to be the difference. The conversation after the game wasn't really about the score, but rather the feeling that Kansas City was the undisputed class of the NFL. The rematch still wasn't inevitable, even though both teams kept winning through the winter months. Tampa Bay eventually caught fire, navigated the playoffs, and beat Green Bay with reigning MVP Aaron Rodgers to secure a spot in the Super Bowl. This meant Brady would be playing the biggest game of the year in his own stadium, which was the first time in NFL history that would happen. Everything at first pointed towards Mahomes finishing the job he started back in November. But then, multiple of his starting O-linemen would be out for the game, and so now it was more of a coin toss. On the other side stood a 43-year-old Tom Brady, appearing in his 10th Super Bowl and trying to win a championship with a brand new team. Then February 7th, 2021 finally arrived. When the Chiefs and Buccaneers met again at Raymond James Stadium for the Super Bowl, the entire world had been waiting for this rematch since their November shootout. The stage was set for literal passing of the torch, with the young superstar expected to officially take the crown from the aging legend. It only took about 1 quarter of football to realize that the torch wasn't going anywhere that night though. The Bucs set the tone early when Brady found Gronk for an 8-yard touchdown in the back of the end zone, looking exactly like they did during their prime years in New England. Brady spent the entire night reading the defense before the snap, finding the exact matchup he wanted, and delivering the ball with 0 wasted motion. He finished the game with a 125.8 passer rating, throwing for 201 yards and 3 touchdowns without a single turnover. While Brady was playing clean and efficient football, the situation on the Kansas City sideline was falling apart. Mahomes struggled through a 26-49 performance for 270 yards and 2 interceptions. Defensive coordinator Todd Bowles drew up a masterpiece that pressured Mahomes using only 4 rushers, which allowed the Bucs to keep 7 men in coverage to blanket the receivers. Mahomes scrambled 11 different times trying to make a miracle happen, but the Bucs never gave him an opening. The final score was a lopsided 31-9 victory for Tampa Bay, marking the first time the Chiefs had failed to score a touchdown in the Mahomes era. At 43 years old, Brady captured his 7th championship ring in his very first season with a new organization. He did it against a man everyone had already labeled as his successor, proving that the gap between great and greatest was still wider than people realized. The previous 3 years had built up a massive question about who truly owned the league, and the answer was now undeniable. Brady wasn't finished, and as incredible as Mahomes was, he hadn't yet reached the full level of GOAT. The Super Bowl didn't just settle the score, it changed the way we look at the entire pursuit of greatness in the NFL. When Tom Brady finally walked away in February 2023, he left behind a resume that looked like a typo. 7 Super Bowl rings, 5 Super Bowl MVPs, and a record-shattering 89,214 passing yards are numbers that simply don't make sense for any one human being to accumulate. Even in his final year at age 45, playing for a Tampa Bay team that struggled to stay above water, he still managed to put up 4,694 yards and 25 TDs. The guy just couldn't turn it off, even when the roster around him wasn't good enough to actually go anywhere. While Brady was finishing his story, Mahomes was busy writing a legendary second act of his own. He didn't fold after that Super Bowl loss, and he certainly didn't disappear from the championship conversation. Instead, he went back to work and built something that no one in the post-Brady era has even come close to matching. The results speak for themselves with back-to-back Super Bowl wins in 2022 and 2023, along with another MVP award for his trophy case. Kansas City became the first team to win consecutive titles since Brady's own Patriots did it 20 years earlier, which is a feat of consistency we rarely see in the modern salary cap era. The Chiefs even pushed for a historic third straight title in the 2024 season, though they eventually fell short to the Eagles in a 40-22 loss that was actually more lopsided than the final score suggests. What Mahomes is in now is the chase phase, and it's a legitimate pursuit of history. He has 3 rings at just 30 years old, 3 Super Bowl MVPs, and a pair of back-to-back titles that nobody else in his era has managed to pull off. But the math is still the math, and that's where the mountain gets steep. Brady finished his career with 7 rings, while Mahomes currently sits at 3, meaning he still needs 4 more just to tie a record that seemed unreachable only a few years ago. That ACL injury in 2025 cost him significant time, and the Chiefs are finally starting to show some real wear and tear after half a decade of deep postseason runs. The roster is changing too, which we just saw when they traded away Trent McDuffie to the Rams this offseason to manage their cap space. That Super Bowl didn't just end the 3-year debate we had from 2018 to 2020, it actually set the terms for every season that came after it. Brady closed the door on the head-to-head argument, and while Mahomes is still knocking, the distance between them is still really far. And that's the chase. So there you have it, the night the GOAT debate ended. Thanks for watching, and subscribe if you're new.